The alarm woke the council like a distant drumbeat becoming impossible to ignore. Every representative in the vast chamber turned toward the holographic map above the central dais. Ambassador Zixter's 3 eyes blinked so fast they became a blur, the Pellerin equivalent of a heart skipping. He rose and, through the translator that rendered his mechanical clicks into shared words, announced the breach. A human warship, the UHS Valiant, was transiting Sector 447. That sector belonged to the Sanctuary, neutral for 3,000 years under the Sanctuary Accords, and humanity had only signed the treaty 2 decades earlier. A single human dreadnought in those waters was, by definition, a treaty violation. The room shifted. Councillor Vin pulsed angry crimson, a living argument for immediate force. General Corps' scales rose in anticipation. This is an act of war, they said, as if speaking the word could make the law move. The Council's reflex was obvious: enforce, contain, punish. Send enforcement cruisers. Surround, board, destroy if necessary. But the Chamber's data came with a name that made even the most hawkish delegates pause: Captain Jake Morrison. He was a human tactician whose strategies during the Battle of Proxima Gate had become case studies in military academies across star systems. He was both honored and feared. The whisper that followed his name, "Why would such a man court galaxy-wide war?" hung between the representatives like a question that demanded more than indignation for an answer. Not far from the council, the human bridge of the UHS Valiant was quiet in the way a trap is quiet before it snaps shut. 200 human officers moved with the calm of those who had rehearsed panic until it was muscle memory. Captain Jake Morrison stood with his hands folded behind his back and watched. The Valiant had been tracking something in Sector 447 for 6 days. They had read an energy signature so ancient and so specific that the words people used to describe it were always accompanied by the same discovery: mute fear, void reapers. This is a phrase you will hear again and again: void reapers, the old weapon constructs that history said had been eliminated after the Harvest Wars. The void reapers belong to the kind of deep memory that civilizations keep in stone, terrifying, near mythical, and backed by records written in blood. The detection of their signature was why Captain Morrison had sailed into a sanctuary zone and why the Council's enforcement cruisers launched in angry, efficient motion. Councillor Mira argued for calm. "Communicate first," she chimed in resonant, crystalline tones. Humans were young, she reminded them, and honor could be a rationale. But General Cor and Councillor Vin read calm as weakness. Send the cruisers, bring the dreadnought to heel, and end the transgression. Nobody noticed, or rather, nobody was willing to notice, the sector's odd sensor noise. For days the Council's long-range arrays had reported interference, technicians had written it off as cosmic background chatter. But in the quiet places between Council logic and human stubbornness, anomalies grew stronger. Small blind spots became predictable absences. And the Valiant, with its specific search algorithms and quantum resonance scanners, had picked up a pattern precisely where the Council's sensors displayed only polite silence. Captain Morrison was not reckless. He was stubborn, yes, but not without reason. When the enforcement fleet hailed the Valiant and demanded compliance under Article 7, Subsection 3 of the Sanctuary Accords, Morrison opened a channel and transmitted 6 days of raw data. He spoke the name that broke the Chamber's confidence: Void Reapers. On the other side, Commander Thor's mandibles twitched from the defensive posture to too late alarm. The alien fleet's consoles showed nothing, a blind spot, and yet the human transmissions were precise. The Valiant had recorded emissions, actual quantum signatures that matched extinct records in human databases. Something, or someone, was jamming the Council's detection apparatus. The Valiant had pushed through the interference because silence could mean sleeping danger. If the Void Reapers were still out there, hidden inside Sector 447, the penalties for a scoop of hubris would be extinction on a galactic scale. It's worth repeating, the phrase that made every veteran in the room go cold was Void Reapers. History had taught civilizations to fear that phrase. It is an SEO phrase we will return to plainly: Void Reapers, because the name holds weight in this story and because you, listening, should remember it. As the Valiant approached the inner sanctum of the sanctuary, the Council's enforcement cruisers converged. 6 ships, orders clear, stopped the human dreadnought. The cruisers were built for deterrence, not diplomacy. But none of that mattered in the face of the larger anomaly, the sensor jamming, the buried energy spikes, the pattern that suggested an ancient fleet had been placed in stasis. If Morrison was right, then Sector 447 was not merely the site of a treaty breach. It was the surface of an old wound. There's a small, human cadence to actions like Morrison's. You cannot always wait for authority to arrive. Sometimes you have to get messy to wake the world up. He ordered his communications officer, Lieutenant Amy Cooper, to open a diplomatic line and then, without sonic dramatics, began to feed the aliens the readings. The Valiant's data was methodical, temporal energy spikes, biological resonance patterns, the sort of stuff xenoarchaeologists quietly study and then take very seriously. On the Council side, initial skepticism gave way to horror as the alien liaison realized the gravity. Whatever was in Sector 447 had not simply been sleeping, it was waking. For now, the story pauses at that hinge, humans violating sanctuary law to prevent a catastrophe that would make treaty infractions irrelevant. This is the slow-burn moral question at the center: was Morrison a criminal or a prophet? The answer would not be given by the Council but by the waking of something designed for extermination. The Void Reapers were not supposed to be capable of waking again. And yet the energy readings the Valiant shared were nearly identical to the ones written about in the oldest archives. If this beginning interests you, if the idea that we might risk the law to save the galaxy resonates, then tell me in the comments. Ask a question. Subscribe if you like thoughtful, slow-burn science fiction that thinks about choices as much as battles. Part 2 follows, the discovery that changes everything, and the truth behind the awakening. The Valiant's transmission uncoiled across the void and changed the tenor of the whole encounter. Where the Council had expected a simple breach, they now faced a possibility that none of their treaties had prepared them for: a dormant Void Reaper fleet, hidden in the one place where military vessels were forbidden, Sector 447. The enforcement cruisers slowed. For the first time since the alarms, there was true deliberation. Lieutenant Danny Carter at his science console was the one who pushed the moment from worry into action. He'd augmented the Valiant's comm array with quantum resonance enhancers and, for a few seconds, the Council ship's blindfold slipped. Hundreds of contacts appeared on everyone's tactical displays, not single ghost signatures but a clustered fleet, close to 300 vessels, each bioorganic and massive. The inert giants were ancient weapons grown rather than built, living warships of dark chitin and pulsating light. The Council's faces, on their hollow connections, drained as the totality became obvious. Void Reapers, murmured Commander Salthor, his voice small and full of a remembered terror. The tactical problem was brutally simple: 300 Reapers, and the Council had hours, not days. The meters on Lieutenant Carter's readouts told a grim story: the fleet's operational output was increasing at about 3% per hour. If that rate held, full activation was a matter of 48 hours. If something accelerated the rise, they'd have far less. The Council's main fleet could not make the jump in time. There's a particular kind of dread that comes when historical horror reappears in present tense. The Void Reapers were built as total extermination platforms, weaponized ecosystems designed to find, assimilate, and erase. They were bioengineered to be predictable in some ways and lethal in ways no doctrine could easily counter. Dr. Helen Grant, the Valiant's xenoarchaeologist, offered one slender hope: the Reapers had been placed in stasis with ancient technology. Biological computers run sequences. If you can interrupt a wake sequence, you might delay or stop it. The Reaper's organic boot protocols could, in theory, be interfered with. That whole of possibility focused on a single fact: the awakening was coordinated. If a central command ship was broadcasting the sequence, destroy the heart and you might stop the body. Without a controlling signal, dormant vessels could remain inert. The target became obvious on the Valiant's holographic map: a central energy signature, stronger than the rest, pulsing in the heart of the formation. It was a risky calculus. Even reduced to a single problem, cut the head off the sleeping fleet, they faced near impossible odds. Commanders Thor, who had accepted temporary liaison status aboard the Valiant, argued that an immediate strike was impossible without massive reinforcements. General Seoar wanted a hammer blow, strike, kill, assert dominance. But the math and the xenoarchaeology were not in favor of brute force. Dr. Grant's analysis suggested another path, infiltration under disguise. Stealth here was not cinematic stealth, it was mimicry at the quantum level. If the Valiant could pattern match its electromagnetic signature to Reaper biosignatures, trick the automated defense grid into treating them as one of the sleeping fleet, they might slip into the formation, reach the command ship, and sever the broadcast physically. The plan hinged on one idea that, in retrospect, seemed both audacious and human: impersonate an ancient enemy to save everyone else. It was a dangerous option. Commander Thor's antennae clicked in obvious disquiet. You could argue it was insane. But human stubbornness meets impossible tasks with improvisation. Commander Lisa Hayes, the Valiant's executive officer, proposed using captured designs, reverse-engineered material, and their own electromagnetic camouflage to emulate Reaper frequencies. In plain words, they'd become what they feared to get close enough to cut the conduit. The insertion began 2 hours later. The Valiant reduced engine signatures, wrapped itself in electromagnetic veil, and ghosted past the outer perimeter. Up close, the Reapers were monstrous. Each vessel vast as a small moon, each hull a living shell of organic lattice and bioluminescent veins. The human crew moved in something like prayer and rehearsal, recognizing the small comfort of training when facing the cosmic unknown. Things accelerated when Lieutenant Carter detected an object physically attached to the Reaper command vessel, a Pellerin scout ship, unmistakably Council technology. The Morning Star, reported missing cycles ago. A Council ship, fused to the command hull, complicated every theory. Why would an intact Council craft be embedded in what had been a sealed tomb? Why had no one flagged it? The discovery rewired suspicion into accusations. If a Council ship had been there, unreported and then found attached to a Reaper, someone had lied or covered it up. The political ramifications were immediate. Dr. Grant's deeper fear surfaced after they boarded the Morning Star. The Scout's bridge was a tomb frozen by time. Its pilot, Vixelin, research director, had died at his console. But around him, improvised wiring and bioconduits fed directly into the Reaper's neural matrix. Someone on the Morning Star had physically bridged Council systems to avoid Reaper and, in doing so, had triggered the awakening sequence. The logs revealed a darker detail. The Morning Star had been sent under counsel of one name, Counselor Vin of the Ethereal Collective, a delegate who had earlier been loudly hawkish about forcing the Valiant to obey. It's a sobering detail that will stick with you: the awakening was not accidental. It was the result of human and Council hubris, of secret salvage attempts and political greed. The Morning Star's crew had tried to unlock forbidden technology. They thought they could control a thing designed to end control. They thought they could harvest tools of genocide for advantage. They were wrong. With the interface still live, the team aboard the Morning Star set charges to sever the connection. The altruism of the move, destroy a lost ship to stop genocide, was layered with moral ruin. Had the researchers been acting out of curiosity or ambition? Had Counselor Vin imagined a military edge so powerful his faction could dominate? Whatever the answer, the immediate need was simpler and meaner: stop the wake signal now, or nothing else mattered. Jake Morrison gave the order, they set the charges, and the detonation severed the conduit. Across the formation, the Reaper command vessel convulsed. The broadcast cut like a snapped wire. The fleet's operational output dropped. The numbers on Lieutenant Carter's console fell as the Reapers returned to a deeper hibernation. For a few moments, the room exhaled. But the universe seldom yields without a price. The Alpha unit nearest them had already completed activation enough to strike. It pivoted, targeting the Valiant with murderous precision. An Alpha remained awake and hostile. And worse, the political crime remained unsolved. Counselor Vin had disappeared in the wake of the exposure. A stealth craft tried to slip through the blockade toward the jump gates. Jake had a choice that wasn't a choice: pursue the traitor and prevent the political rot from seeding other worlds, while fighting an active Reaper Alpha, or cut and run with the truth and hope the Council would act when informed. He chose the narrower moral path that belonged to the kind of people who would risk everything for a truth. They chased the sower of the betrayal and ordered all weapons onto the Alpha, leveraging automated targeting to buy time. Before we go on to the final act, pause. What would you do in Morrison's place? Let me know in the comments. If you want the next part with the boarding, the chase, and the real cost of looking into the long-forgotten engine of extinction, hit subscribe, and we'll continue into part 3, where consequences outpace intent and the galaxy's moral ledger demands payment. They called it the Morning Star when it was found, but the name never matched what lingered inside the hull: ambition, guilt, and cold circuitry grafted to living tissue. The discovery that Counselor Vin had sent Research Director Vixelin to the Reaper site changed the conflict from tactical to judicial. This was no longer merely about stopping a wake sequence, it was about the rot in the Council and the moral entropy that allowed a single voice to gamble with billions of lives. The Valiant's boarding team moved through the Pellerin Scout like intruders in a dead city. Magnetic boots clicked in zero-G, lights carved shallow pools across frost and shattered consoles. Dr. Helen Grant moved slowly among them, cataloging the improvised interface that linked Pellerin computation into Reaper neural tissue. The interface pulsed. The conduit was not speechless, it sang in patterns that no machine in the Council had ever had cause to read. Time was a currency they spent rapidly. The nearest Alpha was fully active and bearing down. Commanders Thor's cruisers were holding the perimeter, trading intercepts to buy the Valiant a margin of safety. On the holographic table in the Valiant's command center, an image of the formation pulsed, maps of arteries and wake sequences overlapped with the Morning Star's last logs. Vixelin's final transmission was short and full of regret: he had hoped to learn, not to command. His work had been curiosity turned into catastrophe. There is a recurring theme in long-form cosmic stories: curiosity without restraint becomes a weapon. That line is not an accusation aimed only at any singular species. In this tale, a counselor's hunger for a technological edge led to a secret mission. That secret mission inadvertently forced Captain Jake Morrison into a violation of the Sanctuary Accords. But the measure by which we judge him is not the law broken but the life saved. He had made a calculation: be the irritant that wakes a sleeping conspiracy, rather than the comfortable bystander, and the result bent history. When the explosive severed the Morning Star's conduit, the Reaper command ship reacted violently, convulsions of bioluminescence, pulses that looked like pain. Across the formation, the ship's wake pattern faltered and began to slide downward into hibernation. That's the clean version. The messy version is the Alpha, a unit that completed activation early and locked its gaze on the Valiant. It was an artifact that the delicate plan did not account for, a living revenant that now stood between them and any real victory. The tactical response was immediate and surgical. Lieutenant Carter slaved the Valiant's weapons to battle protocols tuned for Reaper engagement. The algorithm that had been built on stolen designs and reverse engineering began selecting weak points in the Alpha's bioarmor, places where an ordinary missile strike, guided by precise resonance, might unbalance an organic control center. It was ugly, technical work: how to make something that lived respond like a machine, how to apply geometry to kill a life form that felt like architecture. The automated targeting held and the Alpha slowed, wounded but not destroyed. The Reaper's death throes were not cinematic, they were mathematical and, for the crew watching, painfully clinical. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Amy Cooper guided the Valiant's pursuit of Counselor Vin's stealth craft. It was not only revenge: if a council member who had authorized such a mission could flee, the betrayal would echo. Vine had used political power to try to domesticate genocide. The man needed to be stopped. The Valiant accelerated to catching speed and closed. The chase was tense and personal, a small human ship hunting a traitor across the backdrop of sleeping weapons. They intercepted him a few minutes before the jump gate. Vin's craft was small, airless, the sort of ship built for discretion and escape. When the Valiant brought him into custody, the man's face failed to surprise anyone. Some people, when cornered with evidence of their crimes, retreat into rationalizations, others show the raw calcification of a mind that believed in ends justifying apocalyptic means. Vin insisted he had sought weapons to ensure peace by domination. He said, in a voice that was thin with entitlement, that he had planned to control Reaper tech to enforce an order that would spare the Council from future wars. He believed that a small, deliberate purge might prevent greater chaos, a utilitarian argument dressed in bloodless logic. Jake looked at him and thought of all the ways the galaxy flattered itself with clever rationales. Your calculus nearly ended everything, Jake said. You gambled with the most dangerous weapon our history remembers. You will be judged for that. The Council did not have to wait long for a formal reckoning. Ambassador Zixter's hologram arrived in force. The Council's internal investigations were swift when they smelled the rotten fruit of corruption. Vin's escape attempt made his guilt plain. He was apprehended, and evidence of his authorization of the Morning Star mission was transmitted across the network with a shockingly swift bureaucratic fury. The political consequences were immediate: resignations, inquiries, and the kind of public rupture that leaves a species' faith in institutions raw and bleeding. But the tactical reality remained. With the conduit cut and the Alpha wounded, the immediate threat had been mitigated, not eliminated. 300 Reapers lay in stasis, and now the Council knew. The Valiant had stopped an awakening that might have become a genocide, but it had also exposed a truth no one wanted: the galaxy's security had been brittle, susceptible to the hunger of one desperate counselor. Captain Morrison's choice, break a sacred law to deliver vital truth, had set a new precedent. Other species would remember the Valiant's audacity, some would call it heroism, others an unforgivable transgression. Morrison's captaincy would be debated in legal forums and whispered as legend. For a human officer, the line between criminal and savior had always been thin. He had chosen to cross it. In the days that followed, the Council assembled an emergency task force to monitor Sector 447 and to oversee unmapped regions for other hidden threats. New protocols were drafted for covert discovery and reporting. The Morning Star's log seeded a policy argument that would persist: never unilaterally appropriate unknown weapon systems, and never trust a single human or counselor with that kind of unilateral authority. The Council was bruised but alive. Whether that meant wiser governance or more cunning secrecy depended on future choices. As the Valiant limped back to the rendezvous point with the enforcement fleet, the crew spoke quietly on the bridge. Dr. Grant catalogued what they could salvage from the Morning Star's research. General COR offered grudging honor to the humans for their courage. Yet in quieter corners, debates about sovereignty, about the cost of curiosity, and about how to hold institutions accountable simmered. If you've stayed this long, thank you. This story is about decisions at impossible scales: treaties versus survival, curiosity versus restraint, political hunger versus collective safety. If you want deeper dives into any thread, the biology of the Void Reapers, the political fallout in council chambers, or an audio-ready rewrite for narration, tell me which one and I'll tailor the next version for your channel. Comment below with the phrase Void Reapers if you want an SEO-optimized breakdown of the Reaper biology and why humanity's quantum resonance scanners were the only instrument sensitive enough to find them. Subscribe for the long, slow stories that let ideas breathe. And if you like the pacing and philosophical tone, share this with someone who enjoys science fiction that asks questions as often as it answers them.